Good morning, everyone, from RAP's headquarters in Rockville, Maryland. My name is Alex Aiken, and I'll be your host for today's program. I'm here joined on the line with our two presenters for today, Lori Mitchell, President of Criterion Edge, and Mark Grondin, Chief Operating Officer for Criterion Edge. So welcome, everyone, to today's webcast titled Systematic Literature Review to Help Meet MDR Requirements, sponsored by Criterion. Before we begin, I have a few housekeeping items to go over. First, I'd like to remind everyone that this webcast is being recorded for on-demand access, and you'll have access to the on-demand for 1 year. It'll be available in the RAPS Learning Portal, and we'll send an email out after the program when it's available. I also encourage everyone to submit questions into the Questions tab on the left side of your screen. You may submit questions at any time, and we'll begin addressing them towards the end of the presentation today. A PDF copy is available in the resources section in the left side of your player, and that contains the slide presentation that we're going through today. And lastly, if you experience any technical issues during the webcast, please click on that request support button in the bottom left of your screen. And so folks will be on the line there to help you out and get you connected again. So real quick, we'll turn things right over to Lori and Mark to start the presentations today. So thank you both, and I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Alex. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on systematic literature review. As Alex said, my name is Mark, and I'm COO of Criterion Edge, and I'll be your co-host for the session. The webinar will be presented by Lori Mitchell, the president of Criterion Edge. To give you a little background, Lori is not only president of Criterion Edge, but also a founder of the company, which is a global medical and regulatory writing and safety services firm serving the medical device, pharmaceutical, and biotech industries. Lori has over 20 years of experience in medical writing, safety, and pharmacovigilance management and regulatory reporting. Having provided regulatory solutions to many pharma and medical device companies, both large and small, he's a proven leader in designing practical strategies to meet current global regulatory challenges. Lori is a published author and holds a master in nursing from UCLA. With that, I'm going to show us a little bit about who's attending today. As we see, it's heavily populated with regulatory managers, regulatory affair managers and directors and senior managers, as well as quality professionals, consultants, specialists, et cetera. So we have a wide range, but we see generally who's attending. All right, with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it to Lori to get into the presentation. Take it away, Lori.
Thank you, Mark, and hi, everyone. Welcome to this presentation on systematic literature review best practices and how this process can provide data to help companies make informed, data-driven decisions more easily. We hope this webinar will present you with practical guidance on how to conduct a methodologically sound systematic literature review, insights into how the data can be used to support organizational decision-making, and available technology and tools to support the process. Companies need data to meet global regulatory requirements, such as the new MDR requirements that are being implemented in the EU this May, to inform organizational strategies and directions, and to guide critical decision-making. Those are just a few examples. But performing systematic literature reviews can present multiple challenges to a team. For example, is there access to the right expertise, such as a medical librarian to consult with and design a sound search strategy? Are regulatory compliant processes in place that support robust literature search, screening, and selection activities? And lastly, even with all of the above, executing the steps of a systematic literature review requires people. Even with tools and technology, there is no way to remove trained human eyes and brains from the process. The screening, review, and selection steps take time and people, both of which may be in short supply within a company. Bottom line is that maintaining consistency and increasing efficiency is difficult when there's a lack of available resources, or the steps are ill-defined, or manual processes are used that are slow and prone to error. In today's regulatory landscape, adopting a transparent, reproducible process for literature reviews is essential. The objective of our session today is to review currently accepted systematic literature review practices and provide guidance for designing and conducting a rigorous literature review from search strategies through screening, data extraction, and reporting. At the conclusion of this webinar, you will know how leveraging published data can help meet regulatory expectations and inform internal decision-making. Why systematic literature review is superior to a simple internet search. Steps for conducting a methodologically sound literature review, and how to use available software and tools to support the process. Next slide, Mark. Oh, Mark, I think, there we go. Thank you. We'll start with a description of the framework of a literature review and also examine how an internet search is much different from the systematic literature review process. A systematic literature review is a clear and methodologically sound plan for the identification, retrieval, selection, appraisal, and weighting of published data. This definition is taken from the 2009 article by Moorer et al., in which the authors describe the PRISMA statement, which is a reporting structure for systematic literature reviews and meta-analyses. Systematic review methodology is nothing new. It has long been the gold standard process for evidence-based research, especially in the academic and professional arenas. The data derived from this method has long been used, for example, to develop clinical practice guidelines and recommendations, and describe and support academic-based research initiatives, among other applications. Those same rigorous principles are now being mandated by global regulatory authorities and have been adopted by pharmaceutical, medical device, and IVD manufacturers as best practice. Consider conducting a systematic literature review when there is insufficient manufacturer available data to address an organizational need or regulatory requirement. This slide shows some examples of those situations, which could be to learn more about off-label usage, to support regulatory responses, to prepare a clinical evaluation report for MDR compliance, to develop white papers or other clinical marketing materials, to gain insight into unknown hazards, to assess the current therapeutic landscape, or to inform recommendations for additional clinical or non-clinical analyses. Let's first establish, though, the key differences between an internet search and a systematic literature review, because they're certainly not equivalent to each other. Internet searches should be considered ad hoc because they don't follow a predetermined plan methodology as a systematic literature search does. This graphic presents the high-level differences between the two types of searches. First, can the search results be considered comprehensive and thorough, extensively scoped across all relevant literature sources? The answer for an internet search is definitely no. The results are dependent upon the limited capability of internet search technology, the availability of published literature, and the relative skill of the searcher. However, the comprehensiveness of a systematic literature search is a definite yes, with a couple of caveats. It must be assumed that the search strategy was designed by a person knowledgeable in advanced search terminology, and a robust software platform that supports advanced search capabilities was used. Can multiple literature databases be searched? No, not on the internet. Google Scholar is not really considered a database, and PubMed is the only major literature database that can be accessed on the internet for free. However, again, it is assumed that a systematic search is run on a platform with access to all relevant databases, minimally Embase and Medline. Can the search platform support flexible search terminology? No, the internet cannot. Searches are dependent on keyword selection, or in the case of PubMed, only the AND search function is supported. To achieve comprehensive results from your literature search, the search strategy must use advanced mesh terminology and advanced search syntax. This requires the use of a robust search platform such as ProQuest Dialog or Ovid. Is a methodology clearly documented and reproducible, reliably yielding the same results each time? A definite no for an internet search. However, a well-documented search strategy conducted on a search platform will produce very similar, if not the same results multiple times. Can objectivity in screening and selection of the literature be demonstrated? This characteristic relates not to the literature search, but to the criteria used in the literature screening and selection process. It is possible to apply the same rigor and level of documentation to the screening and selection of literature identified on the internet. However, if the search process itself is already questionable, it hardly matters if the screening and selection process is well described. The battle for objectivity is already lost, so to speak. Now let's dive into the details on the methodology of the systematic literature review. Here's a bird's eye view of the basic steps of every systematic literature review. Develop and define the research question or questions that are under investigation. Design the search strategy and conduct the search using all relevant literature databases. Screen all literature references returned from the search by applying predetermined exclusion and screening criteria to define the selection process. Extract relevant data from those included full-text articles, and finally synthesize, organize, and analyze the extracted data into a report to answer the research questions. Step 1 is scoping. First step is to define the research question or questions, which is really a key step in the overall scoping of the literature review process. You should identify the purpose of the search. Basically, what do you need to know? Then establish clear research questions that will support that purpose. Determine where to search by identifying relevant databases such as Embase and Medline, as I discussed, SciSearch, and others. And will other sources of data be considered, such as unpublished literature or web content? A well-defined scoping process provides the foundation for the entire literature review. It is essential to ensure that the search questions are clear, that the literature search planning process is thorough, and the search strategy is well documented. Key takeaways for this scoping process are: take time to determine the clear research questions and document your process for transparency and reproducibility. And consider developing a literature search scoping worksheet to guide and document the process. Step 2, design and run the search. Using that framework from the scoping exercise, the next step is to design and run the literature search. Here you will need to identify key search parameters, such as relevant search terms. For example, product names and PICO terms. And for those of you not familiar with the PICO acronym or need a refresher, it stands for patient or population, indications or intervention, comparison or comparator, and outcome. Patient, indications, comparison, outcome. Determine exclusion criteria for article selection, such as foreign language or animal studies, technical articles, etc., might be examples of articles you want to exclude from the search results. You'll need to establish certain search limits, such as the time range, and there are opinions in some of the regulatory authorities about how those time ranges should be more comprehensive than perhaps what we've done in the past. And study types or levels of evidence. For example, will you try to exclude abstracts or conference proceedings from your search results? A couple of key takeaways at this step are: use a librarian with experience designing medical information search strategies, and maintain a record of all literature results returned by the search. This documents that all potentially relevant articles were considered for inclusion. Step 3, screening. This slide highlights some of the best practices for literature screening. One defining feature for systematic literature screening is the use of robust methods to minimize selection bias. Successful screening depends heavily on clearly defined eligibility criteria, which are identified during the scoping step. Literature screening is a very human part of the overall process, and screeners should be trained on and strictly follow the eligibility criteria. Transparency and reproducibility are critical components of the screening process, and you should definitely be tracking your screening decisions to comply with global regulatory standards. Lists of excluded references and the reasons for exclusion are common and expected reporting requirements. Now, I'm sure it won't surprise anyone to imagine that the volume of literature to be screened can be huge. One strategy to manage this challenge and make it more efficient is using a multi-stage process where the first level of screening includes review of the title and abstract to identify those more straightforward screening decisions, such as, is the article in a foreign language? Is it a technical data only? Is it not related to the research questions or the drug or device under evaluation? Those are fairly straightforward yes and no questions. This first stage then can save time by identifying the obvious no's and culling out the obvious yeses. Those left fall into the maybe pile, where a review of the next step, which is a full text article, is necessary to determine the final screening decision. Check abstracts first, and then if you're unsure, check the full text article. Taking that approach can save you time and money and expends less manpower during the screening process. The next step is data extraction. So it's for step 4A, data extraction. Data extraction should also be prospectively planned and consistent. Extract PICO data that really serve to inform and elucidate the questions for your review. Remember, patient, intervention or indication, comparator, and outcome. Another critical element of data extraction is the clear identification of relevant safety and performance or efficacy outcome data, as you will be extracting these data as well. The use of predefined, easy-to-use forms is advised, as it helps avoid human error, which often, or maybe I should say inevitably, arises out of manual processes. Using data collection forms can ultimately result in cleaner data and greater efficiency. Lastly, take care that data extraction is performed at the study level. This allows you not to double count the same data that may have been taken from two different included journal sources. Using screening software that allows you to link related publications really helps to avoid this potential problem, because it can be a problem, this inadvertent duplication and double counting of data because it was published in two different sources or there's overlap. Okay, the next step, 4B, data appraisal. Now, of course, not all evidence is equal, and that is a very important consideration. Many, but not all, systematic reviews will require data appraisal. Depending on your experience and training, you might be more familiar with one appraisal methodology over another. In any case, training and expertise is required to appropriately apply the chosen appraisal methodology to your data. Logistically speaking, this information should be collected with the same care used when collecting any other data, and the rationale of appraisal judgments should be documented and attributable back to the original data source. Step 5, the report results. So before we move on to talk next about the tools that can help with the literature review process, let's touch on the importance of transparent reporting. We talked earlier about the PRISMA reporting structure, which is a clear systematic flow diagram as is seen here, that documents each step of the review process. Documentation requirements may vary depending on where your report will ultimately be submitted, but typically will include some or all of the bullet points shown here. Your search strategy and output, that transparent description of your methods for data inclusion and extraction, weighting and appraisal methodology, and summaries of included studies, all are common documentation requirements. A PRISMA flowchart is typically included as part of your documentation for regulatory authorities and major journals. A key takeaway is this. As a rule of thumb, your documentation should be sufficiently detailed to support full replication, so the importance of transparent reporting cannot be overstated. So that was a lot of information. We just spent some time reviewing in detail the steps of the systematic literature review. Now let's look at some tools and technology that can help support the process and a few additional thoughts. So what tools are available to help in the systematic literature review process? As you can imagine, there are tools that can facilitate efficiencies and automation to replace standard manual methods. There are many task-specific tools available, and a few I'll highlight here. I'm sure many of you are familiar with and have used various citation or reference management tools such as EndNote, our personal favorite. These citation management tools allow the user to organize bibliographic information into shareable files, easily generate bibliographic reference lists, and choose a citation style for use in your report as you cite while you write. Literature search platforms such as ProQuest Dialog or Quosa fill a critical gap in providing the user access to dozens of major literature databases. For example, as I've mentioned before, Medline and Embase, but as well many other databases that provide access to very specialized or hard to find information. As some of you may be aware, recent regulatory changes mandate comprehensive searches be conducted across multiple databases. Back to our point earlier, free internet or basic PubMed searches are no longer acceptable to many regulatory bodies globally. These tools are helpful in the targeted role they play in your review process. What is the role of literature review software? Systematic literature review software is designed to support many of the stages of the review process. They may include any or all of the features that you see here, which are designed to support your reviews through that entire cycle. Many time-consuming tasks are automated, and prescriptive processes can be created to maximize data quality. Cloud-based tools allow for storage of your reviews and collaboration between team members. All of your data is stored together in a secure, auditable, and regulatory compliant platform. One leading literature review software platform is Distiller SR, which our team has used for several years now, and we like it very much. We found it to be a powerful and indispensable tool in our literature screening and review process. Consider developing an evergreen process within your organization. Technology is advancing rapidly in this field, and we're beginning to see this new reality of living reviews. Living reviews are reviews that are continually updated on a periodic basis or as new evidence becomes available. Living reviews are part of a larger, planned, and proactive process undertaken to continually monitor for the emergence of new data on your drug or device. By the way, and another plug for Distiller, by the way, the consistent use of a literature review platform such as Distiller really supports efficiencies in these living reviews. Because Distiller stores the results of previous searches, performing an annual literature search update with a 5-year time range can functionally become a review of only 12 months of new literature, because Distiller has retained the results of last year's 5-year review and can integrate the results of the most recent 4 years with the new results of the most recent 12 months. Now you only have 1 year of search results to screen, not 5 years. We've been asked to do that with some clients, and it's a great tool for that. Let's take a moment to review the key points covered today in the literature review process. Your review should have simple, easily repeatable processes that are clearly documented to help reduce bias at each stage. Methodology should be transparent and reproducible. Strict quality control standards and data management practices should be implemented and maintained. Create a sustainable process and update your practices as needed. So, arising out of these requirements are 5 pragmatic best practices for reviews. Optimize screening and data extraction processes across reviews. Implementing the consistent use of available tools and softwares can streamline these processes. If you are using software, be sure you are performing version control and create audit trails. Enforce prescriptive processes wherever you can to produce cleaner data. Consider implementing living reviews so you can stay up to date on data that you manage. And finally, data repositories can allow you to leverage the work you have already done. Finally, let's take a look at a couple of practical case studies that illustrate scenarios in which clinical data derived from systematic literature review helps inform critical decisions within an organization. This first case study involves a request from the medical affairs group of a large medical device manufacturer. The company was considering a design change to one of their endovascular stents and wanted to gather more real-world data on current usage and procedural outcomes for their stent when compared to data on competitor stents of a different design. The search yielded over 200 articles, all of which were reviewed, and based upon the predetermined screening and exclusion criteria, 66 articles were ultimately included for data extraction. Multiple data points were extracted and analyzed on all stent designs included in the search. Those data points included the number of patients, demographic data, indication, and type of procedure performed, procedural success, length of follow-up, and adverse events. The results and analysis were provided to the client for review and discussion with their management team. And based on the report findings, ultimately, the management decided to move forward with a recommended design change for their stent. This next case study is an example of a systematic literature review being leveraged early in the clinical development phase of a unique device technology used in the treatment of colorectal cancer. Now, a lot of you may key into that word unique, and that's often a concern for manufacturers and pharma companies, is that we have a unique drug, we have a unique device. There's not a lot of data out there. So this was the case for this particular client. They had a unique device technology. The company wanted to conduct an extensive systematic literature review to identify relevant competitor evidence, which was challenging, to support early evaluation of their device and contribute to the clinical development plan. Multiple review questions were established for 3 separate searches. Data related to current treatment options, disease burden, and risks were extracted from the screened search results. There was many hundreds of searches of results that came out of these 3 searches that needed to be screened. The extracted data were compiled and analyzed to address the review questions, and the result was the clinical development plan was updated to reflect this additional information gleaned from the data. I think our last slide, great. This marks the end of our presentation today. Thank you all for attending. Now I'll hand it back to Mark to open up the floor for your questions. Mark?
Great. Thank you, Lori. Excellent. So just a quick review. You should understand at this point how to use published data to meet regulatory expectations and inform internal decision-making, why systematic literature review is superior to simple internet search, the steps for conducting a methodologically sound systematic literature review, and how to use software tools to support a systematic literature review. If you don't understand any of those things or have any other questions, feel free to type them in now. We have a few questions we'll start with, Lori. The first one is pretty high level. Can you describe reproducibility?
Well, I will say this, is that I am not a regulatory authority or a regulatory affairs professional. We are subject matter experts on the documents that we create and support for regulatory submissions. Chief among those, for those medical device folks on the call today, is the clinical evaluation report, clinical evaluation plans, and so forth. So the notified bodies whose job it is to come in and review those clinical evaluation plans and reports have quite a bit of opinion on reproducibility of results. I don't think in my opinion, that's a big caveat, in my opinion, and from what we've seen with many of our clients who have gone through MedSAP audits and major audits and have actually done MDR submissions, which are just now beginning to happen. The issue of reproducibility, I don't think any notified body expects that a 100% match on from one search to the other search. I have heard stories that notified bodies will come in and one of the first things that they'll do, or before they come in to audit or review CERs, is they will pull the CER and rerun the search based upon the methodology that you describe in the document. So I think that that's the bigger key here, is that they're not going to want to see a one-to-one match of the 600 articles that you pulled on that search. And that they recognize that human decisions are made when doing eligibility screening, even with the best and the tightest of eligibility criteria. Someone may decide to choose yes over no. So there is always some human decision-making involved. I think notified bodies and others are more concerned about wide variations or important variation in those in reproducible results. That's my answer.
Excellent. Okay, Lori, next is, does SLR have to be performed prior to the CER?
Prior to the CER, a systematic literature review must be conducted on the device or devices under evaluation to search for over some described time period in order to search for relevant clinical data in the published realm. That's for sure. Does it need to be done prior to the CER? Well, I suppose if you're updating a CER and the search was just from a previous CER and that search was run just a couple of months before, you wouldn't need to update the search again. But I think maybe the heart of this question is that we are often asked to, well, we're almost consistently asked to update existing CERs. And in our experience, often the do we need to rerun the search question comes up when we're scoping the old CER for the new CER. And a rule of thumb tends to be if that prior search is more than a couple of months old, 3 months at the max, you better be thinking very hard about doing minimally a bridge search between where the old one left off and your current date, or cleaner than that would be just rerunning an entire search, because then your methodology is intact across all of the results. So in the answer to the yes/no question is essentially yes.
Excellent. So we have another related question. One big takeaway from MDR is the need to include information from relevant guidelines. Are there any tips or helpful resources to easily find relevant guidelines? These do not typically come up in databases such as Embase or PubMed.
So that's a great question, because what we're not trying to, and it takes me to one of our favorite topics at Criterion Edge, which is the development of the state-of-the-art section of the CER. The state-of-the-art and goes to the heart of this particular question. So this question is about where can I find guidances to describe the state-of-the-art of the therapeutic landscape in which my device exists. And therefore, I must then, the job of the state-of-the-art section of the CER is to establish the current technology of which your device is likely to be included. And is that technology ultimately, does it align with current best practices, current professional guidelines, and are the outcomes of safety and performance consistent with what's being seen in the literature? In other words, you establish, this is where you're talking about comparator data, and you're looking at, or pooled meta-analysis data, and you're looking at your safety and performance endpoints there to establish state-of-the-art performance and safety benchmarks that can then be compared, your data on your device can be compared back to. So to get to the question, where do you find these guidelines? We do run state-of-the-art searches separately ourselves. Obviously guideline data and data taken that's pooled data or meta-analysis data that is not specific to a comparator device or to your device doesn't need to be weighted and appraised. So the notified bodies are less concerned about how you build your state-of-the-art and where you find your evidence guidelines. We do internet searches often to just try to scope and try to find what are the relevant guidelines. We ask our subject matter experts at the client what are some of their relevant guidelines that they may know of, and we just do the legwork of looking for them. I don't have any advice other than that very manual process of poking around, essentially, and asking questions and following a trail. Sometimes if you see a guideline reference, for example, if you see a guideline reference in a great article, go chase it down. That's our methodology, and it works very well. We have very robust state-of-the-art sections in our CERs. Thanks for that question.
All right. A lot of questions related to this. Next one. Do you currently establish the definition and expectation of state-of-the-art in the planning stages prior to the search, or do you complete two searches, one on safety and efficacy and state-of-the-art?
Do you currently establish, I'm sorry, I see it on my screen. Do you currently establish the definition? Don't move, Mark. Now I've lost it. I was reading it. Now it's gone. Can you just read it again, Mark?
Yeah, currently establish the definition and expectation of state-of-the-art in the planning stages prior to the search, or do you complete?
Okay, stop there.
One on safety and one on state-of-the-art.
Okay, well, so stop. Do you currently, yes, we do have a scoping document in which we do establish the state-of-the-art strategy and those, and how we'll go about finding state-of-the-art. And a part of that, I think I just described, which is what are the safety and performance endpoints? What are we going to be looking at up front? Scoping is, I mean, I glossed over it as one of the steps, but to us, it's one of the most critical steps. It ensures that everybody's on the same page and we're moving forward in a focused manner on building a very complex document called a clinical evaluation report. So we most definitely do a lot of that work in the scoping. Do we run multiple searches? I think was also a part of the question. And yes, we do run multiple searches, sometimes multiple times. If we don't get the results we expect, and that's the thing about searches too, is that don't be afraid to run one again and tweak. There's always tweaking. Nobody has usually the perfect formula the first time. You'll look at the search terms. We have a medical librarian on staff, and she's extremely experienced. She's been in this business a long time, mostly supporting medical device companies. And she's very experienced in doing that. But even her, or with our writers and our managers looking at the results, saying it wasn't quite what we got. So we do conduct multiple searches and with tweaks to focus our results in a way that makes sense. Because sometimes in the search syntax, an inadvertent association, even in the search protocol or search syntax, will create a lot of false hits. And it's like, oh, why are there 600 coming back? Oh, we see. So there'll be some tweaks to do. I hope that answered the question. I'm sorry. It was a multi-stage question.
All right, this one seems a little easier in the question, at least. What are some other findings you have heard about regarding MDR audits and lit searches?
What findings have we heard about? It gets down to pick a step. Pick any of the steps that we talked about. I think is it reproducible? I think we've talked a lot about that. People are worried about that. Can the notified body reviewer come in and be assured that bias didn't exist, that there is clear documentation? Let's just say that of your device search, that let's say that 500 articles came back. So human eyes, I always say this, human eyes have to lay their eyes on every single one of those 600 results. And every one of them has to have ultimately a yes or a no, include or exclude. And they may do, I've heard of notified bodies doing those spot checks. I've heard of feedback in audits of notified bodies with a device manufacturer sitting across a room and saying, why didn't you include this article? I actually heard that story not too long ago where the notified body reviewer held up a cell phone and said, but here's a really great article on your XYZ device. I don't see it anywhere in here. Would you agree that this device should have been included? And everybody, I'm sure, on the phone knows that if something like that happens, you're in deep water, and everything is now subject to question. So they will look under rocks. They will check, because this is the data. At the end of the day, my feedback to all of you is that I've heard over and over again that the notified bodies takes this process very seriously, and the methodology around it, which, by the way, is described in great detail in MedDev 2.7/1 Rev 4. And they take this very seriously because at the end of the day, this is the data. And yes, you may have manufacturer-held data, and yes, there is PMS data, and you may even be ahead of the curve if you're beginning to prospectively collect PMCF data. But data derived from clinical literature usually is the bulk of the data, and they take the data very seriously because it underpins the argument: is your device safe and performs as intended?
Excellent. Next question on a different area. Can you please express your thoughts on how one should manage/document new risks identified from the use of your device or from similar devices resulting from a systematic literature review?
Right. This now is a question that gets more into your quality management system and your internal processes. And this is also a big deal right now, and notified bodies are looking at that. So here's the ideal world. My thoughts are this, is that there should be internally a robust and independent, if you will, risk management process and procedures described: risk management analysis, reports, documentation in an evergreen fashion that lives on and on. I think most of us know that that's part of any QMS, and it should exist. So let's assume that it does. And certainly the risk assessment matrix, all those risk assessments feed directly into the CER. But let's say that we're doing a CER revision or update, and we're doing a new literature search, and let's just say, to bring it to MDR compliance, it's a 5-year search. And again, human eyeballs are looking at these included articles, and every included article that's deemed relevant and is included gets a once over by the writer for the full text, and then that writer will summarize those full text results. That can be in tabular format or in narrative format, but they are reading every article and summarizing it. What if in the process of reading that article, that writer encounters a risk? Gosh, I used this stent and it, I don't know, it broke. It looked rusted. Whatever. Choose it. It may be noted in the article. What happens then? Our process, and the process if you do this internally, is that is more of a device deficiency, perhaps, or some sort of a device malfunction. And it should be two things. The writer should first check the IFU to see if that exists as a known risk, while simultaneously making sure that the client understands that this particular device deficiency or device malfunction was noted, or some other kind of adverse event that is not noted on the IFU. It needs to loop back to risk ultimately, and risk needs to go through their process of assessing it, and then, if necessary, the risk report is updated, and then that comes back into the CER. So in other words, we work with clients saying we just don't have the time or the manpower or the process yet in place to handle what if during the systematic literature search for the CER, something affects the risk process. That's a risk. That's a risk to the organization. The notified body could clue into that. So the best process is to don't proceed with finalizing the CER if there is a update that's needed to the risk management file. Wait until that's done.
Excellent. Next question is fairly straightforward. How much time does it take for an SLR normally?
Let's talk about calendar days. It takes sometimes a great deal of time in human hours, but in calendar days, all things being best and equal. If we've got the engagement with our client, or you're doing it yourself, and you've got the access to a librarian, and you've done that upfront work, which could be, defining your research questions, defining your safety and performance criteria, defining for screening, defining your search terms, defining your all those other time ranges. I mean, that can be a day or a week, depending on if there's issues that you have to overcome, just defining some of those simple things. But once you run the literature search, that takes mere moments to run a literature search and get output once the search itself is pushed, the button is pushed. But now here comes the output, and is it going to be 50 articles? Is it going to be 500 articles? That will certainly impact your time, as you can well imagine. And then you or your team or multiple people have to look at each one of those. And I talked about that two-step process. If your output from the search includes the title, which it should, and the abstract, though, then you can use that two-stage process. For example, we use ProQuest Dialog, and ProQuest Dialog does have the ability to, once the button is pushed and the search is done, our output is actually a full citation, indexable terms, and the abstract of every single reference that comes back on that search. And we can use that abstract. That's why we can use that quick abstract level 1 to at least call out some of the no's. These need to be excluded. Best case scenario, you can get a literature search done in depending on availability, over a couple of weeks, maybe longer, maybe shorter.
Tough to say. All right. Next one is, what is the basis for requiring more than one search engine results? For example, more than just PubMed.
So I'll go back to my reference to MedDev Rev 4 a minute ago. MedDev Rev 4 has opinions and prescribes or suggests heavily. Of course, MedDev Rev 4 is a guideline, not a regulation, but it's pretty specific about, in its opinion, of how to conduct systematic literature reviews and what databases to use. And it calls out by name Embase and Medline. So, that seems to be the starting point. I don't think the notified bodies will be very tolerant of continued PubMed searches. I just don't think they will be. Now, beyond Embase and Medline, which you have to get a paid subscription to access. But beyond that, perhaps, in fact, one of the case studies when we were talking about that unique device technology that really was very unique, there was discussion during that systematic literature review scoping that were there other databases. There are hundreds of databases out there, and ProQuest Dialog has access to all of them. And there was a discussion on whether or not some of those other databases may have housed data or articles that never made it to Embase or Medline. And ultimately, it was decided that that was unlikely, and that between Embase and Medline, we would catch everything of importance on our research questions. So I really discourage people from using PubMed. With our clients are dealing with but our searches have always been in PubMed. And can't you just take the results of our search that we just did last year in PubMed and then just update it? Well, no, we can't unless we just do another PubMed. It's just simply not reproducible. So it puts folks in a bad spot, and it puts us in a tough spot saying, sorry, we know you did this. We know you found what you found. But if you want this to be MDR compliant, that old way of doing it puts you at risk for not being MDR compliant. So that's where we are with that right now.
All right. And we've got a little more than 5 minutes left, so we'll take as many questions as we can. Any that we don't get answered during the session, we will actually try to answer them following the session. So please go ahead and put any questions you have in there, and we'll try to get them all answered either in the session or after it. All right. The next question is, Is it mandatory to prove the equivalence of the medical device mentioned in the literature to our device under evaluation?
Is it mandatory to say say it again, Mark?
Prove the equivalent.
To prove equivalent
of the medical device mentioned in the literature to our device under evaluation.
No, it's not mandatory to prove equivalence for other comparator devices or other devices found in clinical literature. The only time it's mandatory to prove equivalence is if you are taking the equivalence route to approve or to establish the safety and performance of your own device. So let's say that your device really is new or has no clinical data, but you own the predicate device, and your new device that you're submitting maybe for the first time under MDR is different than your predicate device. That's an equivalence argument that the literature that the CER is taking, and you're in the equivalence section of the CER. You would have to go through a relatively rigorous process to point by point establish how the changes in your device under evaluation, the changes from that device to the predicate device, have no technical, clinical, and biological changes, have ultimately no clinical impact. So that's equivalence. What I think I heard is that I hope I'm understanding the question correctly. If we're writing a CER and doing a clinical evaluation of a device in which no equivalence is claimed, in other words, that device has plenty of data on its own, and you're looking out in the system at doing a systematic literature review for clinical data, published data on the device under evaluation, device X. And you find in the course of doing that, you find quite a bit of data, obviously, on competitor A and competitor B. You find a lot of that data that are very similar. What do you do with that data? That goes in your system, state-of-the-art section, because those comparators help establish those competitors. I shouldn't say comparators, I misspoke. Those competitors, and that competitor data helps to establish the overall state-of-the-art for the technology that your device is. So that was a long, maybe confusing answer, but that's the best I can do on the fly.
And any particular tools available for the data extraction?
Yes, Distiller. I hate to this is really not a Distiller commercial, but Distiller has a whole process set up within it to do to perform data extraction. It's pretty cool. If you don't use Distiller, you're going to be in the Excel, probably be in the Excel spreadsheet world, which works actually. And sometimes we don't use Distiller to extract data if the data is relatively straightforward and there are not a lot of data points, and maybe we don't have a lot of literature. It just looks like a big spreadsheet that shows, column after column after column is all of your endpoints and data that you want to extract. Your in number to what is the type of study? Is it a RCT? Is it a case study? Is it something? It's just column after column of human eyes, again, looking at each one of the included articles, which are the rows, and just entering the data here. Length of follow-up, 6 months, 2.5 months. You're just putting all that. And ultimately, you're going to aggregate that into some sort of tables when you're reporting on the literature in your CER. A Distiller does that much more easily, and it's very auditable. That's the great thing about Distiller.
All right, Lori, it looks like we've run out of time. We want to thank everyone for attending today. And as I said, what we'll do is we'll round up all the questions that we have that weren't answered during the session, and we'll do our best to follow up in the next week with answers to those questions. Lori,
Thank you, everybody. I know there are a lot of questions. I can see them on my screen. Thanks everybody again for your attendance and engagement. We really appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. And thank you, Lori and Mark. Thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to prepare the presentation and answer everyone's questions. I know the audience definitely appreciates that. Just some final reminders to the audience before we sign off, to please return to the RAPS Learning Portal and complete the evaluation there to receive your credit for this program, and it'll help us improve future programs as well. Again, another reminder for the on-demand recording will be available within 48 hours after the end of the program today, and an email will be sent out to let you know where that's available and when it's available. So thank you all once again, and please enjoy the rest of your day.